All right, so we are picking up with lesson 3, and I was trying to decide, should I just ask the women what the responsibilities of the man is, and then should I just ask the men what the responsibilities of the women are? We still have to go home with them. Those are wise words, Andy. We still have to go home together, so let's make sure that we walk out of here loving each other. All right, so lesson 3 is kind of a combined lesson between the roles and the responsibilities, both of the man and the woman. And I'm not specifically just talking about husbands and wives. This is going to include being mothers and fathers as well. So the first 4 questions, that's all that we're dealing with, both the man and the woman and their roles and responsibilities, and then also some good examples and some bad examples that we can read of in scriptures that will kind of help us hopefully be better husbands and better fathers and better wives and better mothers as well. So question number 1 says, read the following passages, and should be then. Didn't nobody even correct me on that one. And then list and explain the roles of the man, again, both the husband and the father, in the family. So what's the role of the man in the family? And we're not going to take the time to go through all of these and read them. I hope that you did go through and read them, but what's that, Miss Shirley? He is the head. All right? What does that mean?
Leadership.
Okay.
The buck stops here.
All right. That's one way to put it. That's definitely a blunt way to put it. All right, what else? So he's the head, he's the leader. That is one of the things I think that I guess I come away with just reading through the scriptures, all of these, and the importance of being the head or being the leader, and just how much responsibility actually is included in that. We can say, okay, well, the buck stops here. We have to make the decisions, which making the decisions is not entirely the way that I would put it, but there are a lot of responsibilities that fall on a husband that we need to understand and recognize, that if we're going to be the husbands, if we're going to be the fathers that we're called to be, then we're going to have to live up to these responsibilities. So this is obviously a very widely thing in our society that is not liked. Just the way that the description of husbands and wives is described in the New Testament. And we'll talk about this more whenever we talk about the role of a woman. But I did want to read what Brother L.A. Stouffer had in his book when he talks about being the head of the wife. And he says, the husband's rule of the wife as his love for her is illustrated by the rule of Christ over the church. What an exacting standard. And just in those 2 sentences, I hope that we can understand the gravity of the role that we have to fulfill and the responsibility that goes along with that. Go ahead, Norm.
It carries with it the idea of this responsibility is responsibility for the souls of those under his charge. So similar to the responsibility that the elders have, and of course an elder has to be a man, so again it's part of with the family, etc., etc. But this extra special idea of leadership is not just about taking care of yourself. It's not a manager. It's of other people. We're talking about you're responsible for the souls of those under your charge, which is your family. And so that takes it to a different level when you consider what the world thinks of leadership versus what God thinks of leadership.
Yeah. So, again, Brother L.A. Stover, he says, the role of the husband as head of the wife is an occasion for much misunderstanding, fierce animosity, and outright rejection of God's design for the home. And I think that because of the rejection and the animosity that goes along with that, we have Christian men that aren't living up to their role as a husband, as the head, as the leader, because of a sense of being scared of, well, what society thinks of what God's Word says. He continues and says, the shallow view that the husband merely stands atop the marriage relationship as a chief executive to make decisions and issue orders to the wife is both a distortion and abuse of God's plan. Many husbands, no doubt, think of their wives as servants and rule them in the absence of love, and such husbands may be the ruler rather than the exception. God, nonetheless, did not plan it this way, and husbands of that persuasion are not spiritually prepared to be the heads of their wife. So, again, he said, what an exacting standard when we're going to be compared to Christ. And he goes on and says, in 1, not to be taken lightly by husbands. Husbands, as a prelude to ruling their wives, must commit themselves to understanding Christ's rule of the church. That rule, as will be seen, blends imperceptibly and flawlessly with love. And I don't remember who I was talking to over the last couple of weeks just about the role of the husband and how it is compared to Christ and the church. And I think so much of the misunderstanding that we have as husbands and even as wives and what the role of the husband is because we don't understand the role of Christ in the church. And to me that's disappointing, because if we truly understood the role that Christ had with the church and the relationship that Christ had with the church, I don't think we would be questioning the role of the husband as much as we do. He continues on and says, Christ is not only known as head of the church, but is called master, or in Greek, despotes. That's in 2 Timothy 2:21 and 2 Peter 2, verse 1. That's the origin of the English word despot and means dictator or absolute ruler. Husbands are likewise portrayed as lord of the marriage relationship, a term Sarah used to describe her husband Abraham in 1 Peter 3, verse 6. As the head controls the body totally, so husbands as heads or lords of their wives rule absolutely. Sound harsh? Yes, until one understands how the despotic rule of Christ over the church proceeds so beautifully from his bosom of infinite love. Christ, politically speaking, is a benevolent dictator. He rules in the interest of his subjects, so should loving husbands. Jesus, for example, calls all men, come unto me and take my yoke upon you. Although he has all authority and men must hearken to all things to him, Christ beckons them and rules them for their own good. Gets that? And I hope that we understand that. All right, Christ is ruling for our good. This is also spelled out in the Beatitudes, the Lord's assurance of happiness to his subjects. The word blessed, as William Barclay translates it, means bliss, the promised peace and joy the Lord offers his kingdom citizens. And I think that, so the first thing that I put as opposed to being head, which obviously is the correct thing to say, but I put being a leader in the home, like Norm said. And one of the reasons why I like to think of it that way is because it helps me grasp better about the role that Christ had with the church. And when Christ was in this world, what did he portray? What kind of example did he portray to his disciples and expected them to portray likewise? A servant attitude. And we have done our best when teaching these young men. We call it young men's leadership training, but the focus has been on service. Okay, if you're going to be a leader, you're going to be a servant. All right, God said if you want to be first, you're going to be last. And that's the way that we need to think of it whenever we are husbands. So Matthew chapter 20, verses 26 through 28, and I think this really helps define servant leadership. It says, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so again, when we recognize the attitude of Christ and how he not only lived his life, but how he lived his life for the church, that should really help us understand the role that we have as husbands. And when it comes to then making decisions, then we're not going to make decisions that's going to be in our best interest. It's going to be in the best interest of the family. But we do have to be willing to make decisions. We have to be willing to be that leader and to make sure that we are leading our family, both our wives and also our children, in a way that would be well-pleasing to God, because we will be held accountable for that. And so we can't shirk that responsibility because society says that we should. We need to make sure that we are holding up our role as the husband and the father. Go ahead, Norm.
It's interesting too that the two aspects of God's organization for the family is you and you can see it in organizations everywhere. That is, in the husband and wife relationship, it's a voluntary thing where they choose each other and choose them. The wife chooses to be in submission to the husband in his role in that. But when you come to the leadership over the children, that's not a volunteer organization. The children came into we made the choice, but they had no choice. And so there's a special responsibility then that the husband and wife have towards those that are not volunteers. They have to be there. It's God's will that they be there. And there's a different dynamic that's brought in there. So just getting the husband thing right is not the same as getting the parent thing right.
Yeah. Also, and this is rather short, but I did want to read Brother Robert Harkrider's comments on this. He says, wives are commanded to submit to their husbands even as the church is subject unto Christ, Ephesians 5:24. In fact, one of the qualifications for an elder is that he rules well his own house, 1 Timothy 3:4-5. Same thing as Brother Stouffer. Sound harsh? It does, unless we understand how Christ provides loving leadership of the church. Women liberals conclude that the Bible views wives as abused creatures, slaves, inferior nobodies who have nothing of value to offer the world. Such a view is as far from the truth as east is from west. If husbands loved their wives as Christ loved the church, wives would feel loved, honored, and appreciated. They would recognize themselves as persons of worth, esteemed as beings of inner beauty, and viewed as queens of the home. And so, again, I think it's just the misperception of our society, and I'm not going to say that the church in some regard hasn't played a role in that, because of the way that we have maybe not stood for what we should have stood for. I know there's been a lot of things that have gone or been passed around on social media lately, and there was an article supposedly from back in the 50s, about the way that the men and their husbands treated their wives, and there was I've seen several comments regarding that, and I think that there was total misunderstanding of Ephesians chapter 5 and a misunderstanding of what Christ's role was in regards to the church and what our roles are in regards to the wives. Any other comments on that particular role? That's a big one. Everybody good? All right. So what's something else? All right. So that's obviously one role, one responsibility of the man in regards to the family, being the leader of the home. What's another one? Provision. Okay. So what does that include? I guess it depends on the wife. I read something that actually we'll go over it about providing for the wife. But obviously this is not just the wife. This is for the family in general, that we are to be the provider. And that is one of the responsibilities that is given to the husband. We know over in 1 Timothy chapter 5 in verse 8. And so what would we be considered if we shirk that responsibility?
Worse than an infidel.
All right, we would be considered worse than an unbeliever. So one question that you need to ask yourself then before getting married, if you are a man, is, am I going to be able to support this family? Am I going to be able to provide for this family? Because if you're not to the point that you're going to be able to provide and be supportive of the family in all aspects, as Brother Jesse said, then you ain't got no right getting married, because you're not going to be able to fulfill God's given role for you. So yeah, we've got to be supporters. We've got to be providers of the family. What else?
Not to provoke your children.
All right. Do not provoke your children. And I don't know. I sure felt like I was provoked a lot when I was a kid. So what does that mean? How can we provoke our children?
Harsh.
All right. Being overly harsh. And obviously we all have different experiences, and I'm somewhat being lighthearted. But my dad worked third shift, and he had the nickname Grizzly. And I always felt, we knew when he was on third shift, you don't mess with him. All right? That's bad news. But yes, we can be overly harsh with or even unreasonable in our commands and things that we are telling our children. We can be needlessly severe. And the truth is, just because we might be grown doesn't mean that our kids can't get on our nerves and cause us to do things that we should not do. And so we have to be very, very careful and recognize that we are the Father. We have to make sure that we are being godly in the way that we treat our children, because that's what God expects, but also because our children are watching and they're paying attention and they're being affected by the way that we are treating them. And so the way that we govern our children, we could do it to the point that we are so harsh and so commanding that we are provoking them to anger and causing them to go down a path that they shouldn't. And so we have to be very careful of that. Norm, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, again, especially this idea of the provoking, not provoking them is because they're people that are in a complete position of, they have no power. They are powerless from the time that they're babies, physically powerless, to up through until they become, of an age that they can take care of themselves. And so God, so there's a special responsibility when you have power, absolute power over somebody. There's the tendency for people to take advantage of that, and that becomes then very, very much this idea of getting provoked. You can provoke somebody, but if they have no power, what a frustrating situation to be in, and we shouldn't frustrate our children.
In our dealings with our children, they need to know, even if we are upset, that we are acting with love in our heart and not with anger. All right? If we act out of anger toward our children, then they're going to know that. And so they need to understand and be able to feel that even though there's going to be some discipline and some training and some correction, we're doing it out of love. We're not doing it out of anger. And so I think that is part of, not provoking your children is, I'll just go ahead and throw in this aspect of discipline. And what does that include? Because we know that we're told to do that as well as parents. Teaching. And we'll get in a lot more detail about this when we talk about discipline in particular. But that's not just the whippings that I got when I was growing up. That's part of it, but the whippings were used for teaching too. But the word itself, discipline, really has this idea of instruction, education, this training, Norm said. So it's kind of all-encompassing. Miss Shirley?
I don't know. I always thought getting talked to was worse than I thought would be to be spanked.
Yeah.
I never received a spanking from my daddy, but he could look at me and I know, sit down and hush,
Yeah.
But you don't have to be whipping them necessarily, but
Yeah.
I'd rather have a whipping than a good talking to.
And we'll talk in more detail about this too when we talk about parenting. But it does require some wisdom. Those of you that have multiple children or have raised multiple children, you know that all children are different. I did get whippings, but I didn't get nearly as many whippings as John because I was more like Miss Shirley. And from a young age, I had this innate feeling of wanting to make my mom and dad proud. And when I knew that I had let them down, I was devastated. And so I think that there are definitely going to be times for some whippings.
What I could do.
You learn from the older ones, that's right. That's wisdom as a child, too. All right, anything else on providing the instruction of the discipline? Ken?
With regard to not provoking your children, I think one thing that can happen is a parent, especially a father, might give demands or have requirements of his kids that he himself is not willing to do. I found that in my family. When my dad, I was learning how to drive. I'll give you an example. When I was learning how to drive, my dad was with me in the car, and he would say things like, "Don't drive like I drive like I say." In other words, don't follow my example, but you do what I tell you to do. And that's not the right attitude.
No, and that's a great point. That was actually the last thing I had under that topic was it requires words and actions because they're watching you, and you can't have this mentality of do as I say, not as I do. That's not given the correct instruction. That's not given the correct training. And because most likely they're going to do as you do, not as you say, because you are showing them the pattern. And so we have to be very mindful of that. All right, what other roles do we have? Jesse Jackson?
I want to bring this up because I have heard people in my life that I've talked to, and I've read things also. And when I was protection, okay, and I have heard people of Christian persuasion, like Christian can't be violent, and they can't reconcile what they can do in defense of family, say, and actually do something physical against an aggressor. And I don't know if that's really permeated necessarily in our fellowship or not, but I have heard arguments against that. And I just asked the person, I said, why in the world can't that be contained within provision? Like they're looking for biblical whatever. We build a house to provide protection from the elements or from the wolves or the lions or the bears or anything else is really no different. But I don't know if anybody in here has got anything to add to that or not, but I've been asked that before, and that's the best I could do with it.
Yeah, no, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. And whenever we look at just even the first century church in general, they always did things to protect themselves. They weren't just allowing themselves to be harmed. If they could keep from it, obviously they weren't going to turn away from it. If it was facing them, they weren't going to deny God, most of them in those situations. But we see first century Christians where they were, hide or lock themselves away or do whatever to protect themselves. And so I think that we definitely should be doing that together, but as husbands, as fathers, most definitely I think that we have the responsibility of protecting our family. I mean, the example of Christ is he laid down his life for the church. So if that is required of you, I think that is exactly what you're going to have to do. If it is going to be giving your life for your family, and you're going to do what you can to protect them. Let me get Norm and then Brother Bill.
With that, when it came down to the question, Christ asked, "Bronze and swords." They had two, and he appointed 2 people to carry them. And he was not upset necessarily that they drew them and used them, just upset at the timing. I mean, the timing was not right. This was meant to be when he used it. But he didn't rebuke him for actually having it and being willing to use it. And it's, the first Gentile was a Roman soldier. He didn't stop being a soldier just because he became a Christian. Now there's a lot of stuff that you have to think about as a Christian before you do violence. There's a whole lot of soul searching you have to do ahead of time. But God gives clear instructions on what he approves of and what he doesn't approve of. And it's all you gotta do is read it.
Brother Bill?
I think when we talk about provision, a lot of people equate that with financial responsibility, not provided for. There's a lot of absentee fathers that provide financially for children, but I think at the top of the list for Christian fathers is spiritual guidance, and of course protection. I think that's all part of it. Emotional support. It's not just, you're living under my roof, you're going to do as I say, and thinking that it's all about providing financially. It's not.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because our society is where it is because we have a lot of families that are fatherless, that are just being provided money. But we can have that mentality as Christians too, where we can go home, sit in our recliner, and think, well, I just made my day's wages. I'm providing. You're living under a house that I'm paying for. You got food on the table. You got a bed to sleep in, and then we just sit there and think, well, now I've provided. No. That's a husband that doesn't understand what it means to provide and doesn't understand what his role is. All right, there's one like really, really big one that we still ain't hit yet. Bonnie?
Well, 1 Peter 3 talks about how that husbands are supposed to live with their wives in an understanding way, showing them honor as a fellow heir. That word understanding there, if I'm reading correctly, the Greek is knowledge, like gnosis. So I guess I'm asking you, what exactly does that mean when you think of it in terms of, like, we think, oh, we need to be understanding, we need to understand they're a female, they're different, but the word is knowledge, so maybe it means something different. I'm just wondering if anybody has studied that.
I think in layman's terms, the way that I would explain that to someone that's going to be a husband is learn what makes her tick and act accordingly. And so you're going to have to take the time to get to know your spouse, to gather that knowledge, to gather that understanding, to be able to know better how to even fulfill these other roles. Because, we joke about women being different than men, and women are different just from woman to woman. And so we have to make sure that we have this knowledge or this understanding, because we are told to live with them with this understanding, with this knowledge. And so part of being a servant is you need to know the best way to serve them, because different people need to be served in different ways. And so I think that is all, it all just kind of goes together to me. So be considerate of her needs, but you can't be considerate of her needs if you don't know really what her needs are. Go ahead, Bonnie.
And I wonder if there's more of a spiritual focus here, if that is the intent of the passage. It's, especially given the context of understanding that the wife is a fellow heir, that your own prayers may not be hindered. I'm wondering if there's like yes, live with them in an understanding way, that they might have a different personality or look at things different than you, but also just in a spiritual sense, having that knowledge that she is equal in God's eyes just as much as you, and you have to be the leader and provider of what she needs in that realm too.
Oh yeah, I think that is the ultimate thing, absolutely. But one way to help her even in that, it doesn't specifically say this, but we can provoke our wives. We can really provoke our wives, and so we need to make sure that we are leading in such a way that we're not provoking our wives either, because the truth is, husbands play a vital role in, we could cause our wives to sin just because of the way that we're acting. And so we need to make sure that we're not doing that. So 1 Peter 3:7, what Bonnie brought up, so we got to live with them with understanding. We got to live with them with honor. So what does that mean?
Value, just like we talk about with honor thy father and mother, and embedded in that word, the meaning is you value your parents, and certainly you better value your spouse, your wife.
So practically, how do we do that? Or how would we not do that? We read over in Proverbs 31:28 that they praised her in the gates. So what would be the opposite of that? What would be the opposite of praising them in the gates? Yeah. We're talking bad about it. All right, and it may not be to their face, but all the guys are getting together and we're talking about the weather, and then we're talking about our wives. Are you showing your wife honor? Yes.
And since I've dug myself into a few holes in a class like this, I have a friend that works on the chip aisle with me, and he actually is recently divorced, and it just keeps getting worse and worse when the things get panned out and done. And he looked at me, and he knows how many kids I got, and he said, "You ain't never going nowhere." I said, "I thankfully don't want to go anywhere. She's the only thing that I got." You know, so and he, you know, it diffused, and we always joke and cut up, but he actually turned around and walked off. Like I don't know, he didn't have a rebuttal or didn't expect me to say that. He expected me to throw dirt or something. Long-term friend of mine, I'm not offended, but it was just funny that he didn't have anything to say after that.
I mean, I think that when a bunch of guys get together and one starts talking about their spouse, that's what everybody is kind of expected to do. And we're told to honor them. We're told to value them. And that's not just when we're looking her in the eye. We're not going to ridicule her publicly or when we're at the gate, so to speak. All right, but it also says that we're supposed to live with them as the weaker vessel. What does that mean?
What's the message here?
Andy said that means open the pickle jar for me.
I love pickles.
He's opening a whole lot of pickle jars. Norm?
This is the difference between the Tupperware and the fine china. That idea of the weaker vessel, we're talking about something that is more delicate and neat and will break more easily. And guys, we all know from an emotional standpoint, one of the great things about God's creation of women is that they have a higher emotional level tinderbox that's there, and you can light it easily, and and that's part of that weaker vessel part or aspect of it is that it's beautiful, it's tender, it's delicate, and it can be broken easily.
Yeah, I read some, and I've heard, I think Jesse's even used this in lessons here, talking about the wife as the weaker vessel and describing it as china, and you got to live with her as if she's china and not steel. But the truth is, the weaker vessel doesn't mean weaker, because the truth is sometimes the woman in the relationship or the wife, she may be stronger spiritually, and she may be stronger physically too. So that's not obviously what it's talking about. Normally they are, yes, that would be the exception, not the rule.
That's what all these transition people that want to change their thing, and they're wanting to pay for it as if they were that sex, and there's all kinds of trouble with that.
Yeah.
And,
But even if your wife is stronger than you still should treat her as the weaker vessel. Okay, that's the command. And we talked about this some last week, that we're supposed to view them as fellow heirs of grace, and Bonnie alluded to this too, so that our prayers would not be hindered. So obviously this is very important as husbands. Norm P., real quick.
All these subjects point back to Ephesians chapter 5 and the relationship that God describes and makes synonymous with marriage, which is Christ and the church. Christ treated the church and treated us the way that he demands husbands treat with their wives. He did not treat us, he did not treat the church as a common thing. He honored her. He gave everything for her, glorified her, just all the things that he has given up for her. And we were and are the weaker vessel in the relationship. We cannot pull it on our own. And he's the one that has all the provision, all the things that are there, and all the love that we could possibly ask for and want. And if that's what we're giving as a husband, our wives aren't going to look anywhere else, because it's being provided. And all the protection, all the might, all the masculine things If we are able to provide them as Christ provided them, we will be successful in our marriage.
All right, so it is 7:38, and we still ain't even said the one word that we really should have said, okay? There's one, this should be at the very top, and we still ain't said it. So can somebody please, what's the main role of a husband? To love his wife. Thank you, Miss Shirley. I'm going to give you a gold star whenever we leave. All right? So Norm talked about Ephesians chapter 5. So it said 3 times. All right? That tells me that's really important. All right? Now, how many types of love are there? So what type of love is talked about there in Ephesians chapter 5? Agape. All right. So what is agape love?
I guess same that Christ had for the church.
Self-sacrificial love. The same as Christ had for the church. Yes.
The best benefit of that person that's receiving the love.
Yes. So we're told to love as Christ loved the church. We're told to love as we love our own bodies. So the word agape, it means devotion, concern, goodwill, dedication, commitment. And so it's not an emotional type of love that I love you because you make my heart flutter. Okay, this is a commitment, a dedication type of love that I care for you so deeply. I'm so devoted and so committed to you that I'm going to do whatever it takes to care for you. And the reason why I say that this is the most important, because when we do this, everything else should be easy. All right, when we view our relationship with our wives as one, as Christ loved the church, then it is something that is going to that just take care of itself. I think that we are also told to love our lives in the other ways. Phileo, which is more of a sentimental or an affectionate type love, and we're also told to love them eros, the sexual way that we've already talked about. But the love that is talked about there in Ephesians chapter 5 is agape love. This, as Lena said, this self-sacrificial love.
Her husband in the same respect, too.
Yes, yeah, we ain't got to the wives yet, though, Miss Shirley. Don't jump the gun on me. We got a lot we got to hit on with the husband, all right? Because I have also heard complaints that the church spends so much time talking about the woman's got to be submissive, and we don't ever talk about the roles of the husband. So, all right, I want everybody to walk away from here knowing that we've spent a lot of time talking about the roles of the husband, because it is important, all right? So, yes, we need to make sure that we are loving our wives in the way that Christ loved the church. Any other things you can go ahead, Norm?
We get into the needs, providing the needs, physical, spiritual, all those things. It goes back to what the ultimate result is, the highest form of that love, which is wanting to have the soul of that person spend an eternity in heaven. And that's the highest goal. And so all of these things are associated with that. The physical needs, the spiritual needs, it's all with the highest goal. And for you to say, I love you, and then do something that would make it so that your wife now is in a position where her soul's in jeopardy, you don't love her. And that's, for those going into the marriage at the beginning, that's a good question to ask right up front. Is that how is my mate helping me to get to heaven?
And one point that really should be made is agape love is not a conditional love. All right? It's not based on, well, if you meet these conditions, and if you make me feel this way, then I will love you. Okay? We ain't talked about the wives. All right? As husbands, we're told to love your wife. I don't care what the wife is doing. Husbands, love your wife. It can't get any more plain. All right, so I've got a list of the 10 commandments of husbands. This is from Brother Mark Copeland. I already see some smiles, but this is pretty good. So number 1, you shall not take your wife for granted, but will honor and respect her as your equal. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. Number 2, your highest allegiance except God shall be to your wife, not relatives or friends. And I didn't add anything because this was his list, but I would have another comma and say, or children. Okay? Your wife is more important than your children. Okay? Your allegiance is to your wife more than it is to your children. Number 3, you shall frequently tell her how important and valuable she is to you. Number 4, you shall hold your wife's love by the same means that you want it. Turn over to Song of Solomon chapter 5. We're going to read that as we end because this is pretty good. This is going to be good for husbands and wives. Number 5, you shall actively establish family discipline with your wife's help. Ephesians 6, verse 4. Again, that's, we're in that part of it together. Number 6, remember to do all the little things for your wife when you say you will. Well, that's a big one. Number 7, keep your eyes on your own wife, not your neighbor's. Number 8, you shall make every effort to see things from your wife's point of view. Number 9, you shall not fail to kiss your wife every morning. And I'll let you read Song of Solomon 8. Number 10, you shall not be stingy with your wife when it comes to money. Yeah, just quit opening pickles. All right, so as we close, Song of Solomon 5, I'm going to read 10 through 16 real quick. My beloved is dazzling and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. His head is like gold, pure gold. His locks are like clusters of dates and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves beside streams of water, bathed in milk and reposed in their setting. His cheeks are like a bed of balsam, banks of sweet-scented herbs. His lips are lilies, dripping with liquid myrrh. His hands are rods of gold set with beryl. His abdomen is carved ivory and laid with sapphires. His legs are pillars of alabaster set on pedestals of pure gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedars. His mouth is full of sweetness, and he is wholly desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. If we can continue to look at our spouses like that before or after we have been married, and not just during the honeymoon phase or even before you get married, that's a pretty good looking dude right there. All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to speed up a little bit. We won't spend much time on the wives because the husbands, their roles. I'm just kidding. We'll pick up with question 2 next class.